Don't fuck with the Chuck. Just like the good old days. Nothing like a strangulation to get the circulation going. You're my only ticket out of here, Andy. I gotta get out of this goddamn body. Where are you, you little shit? You're a fucking drag, you know that?
Child's Play, also called Chucky, is an American horror franchise centered on a series of 7 films created by Don Mancini, and the films mainly focus on Chucky, voiced by Brad Dourif, a notorious serial killer known as the Lakeshore Strangler, whose soul was transferred inside of a good guy's doll following a voodoo ritual in order to avoid the afterlife and quite possibly avoid going to hell. The original film, Child's Play, was released on November 9th, 1988, and the film has spawned 6 sequels and has gone into other media such as comic books, video games, tie-in merchandise, and an upcoming TV show. The first, second and fourth films were also box office successes, with all the films earning over 182 million worldwide, including revenues from sales of videos, DVDs and VOD and merchandise, and the franchise has garnered at least over 250 million. It also won a Saturn Award for the best horror franchise. Child's Play is an upcoming American slasher film directed by Lars Klevberg and written by Tyler Burton Smith and produced by Orion Pictures, and it's a remake of the 1988 film of the same name and the 8th installment of the film series, serving as a reboot. The film is scheduled to be released in the United States on June 21st, 2019. Now for the history of Chucky. Charles Lee Ray was born on March 9th, 1950 at 3:30 p.m. and was a voodoo practitioner and a serial strangler originally from Hackensack, New Jersey. Charles Lee Ray was born to an Irish-American mother who came from a wealthy family but worked as a bartender and dancer, and an Australian immigrant father who was an alcoholic and would frequently abuse him and his mother, Mina Elizabeth Ray. His mother hung herself when he was only 10 years old, and he was then put into care. But despite this, Charles was a very intelligent child with a high IQ, and he was also extremely shy, introverted, and suffered from severe anxiety disorder and depression, and as a result, Charles was bullied right up until high school. When Charles was 14, he wrote in his diary about why and how much he hated humanity and had no feelings towards humans or other living creatures. It's also implied that members of Charles's family were also murderers, and this might have been where Charles got some of his psychotic personality traits from. Charles Lee Ray apparently went to a man named John Azel Bishop, who is also known as Dr. Death, to learn about voodoo magic as to find a way to cheat death, and although John was unaware of Charles's true motives, at some later point Charles met and befriended Daniel Pierce, and was also introduced to his family. His wife Sarah, who was pregnant with Nick at the time, and his daughter Barbara. Charles fell secretly in love with Sarah and wanted the two of them to be a family, and at some point later on he murdered a woman named Vivian Van Pelt and stole her $6,000 ring for unknown reasons. He also met Tiffany Valentine and she became his girlfriend, though Charles didn't really view her as such, and he also was still in love with Sarah, but then he killed Tiffany's mother. One night Charles found Daniel walking home and offered him a ride home, and at some point he managed to subdue and drown him. And he also later attended the funeral along with Sarah's family, and he kidnapped Sarah and held her in the basement of a building, possibly the same apartment building, located at 730 Stony Island Avenue on the south side of Chicago. He revealed his true motives to her and everything he did to her family, now believing him to be part of the family. And at some point, Sarah managed to gain access to a phone where she dialed 911. The police showed up to the building and Ray realized what happened. Enraged at Sarah's snitching to the cops about us, he stabbed Sarah with a voodoo knife in the stomach. This caused Nika's paraplegia, paralysis of the legs. Later after that, she was born. Ray escaped and was chased down the street by a detective named Michael David Norris, who proceeded to fire on Ray, critically injuring him. Bleeding heavily, Ray stumbled into a toy store and collapsed into a pile of good guy dolls. Knowing he would probably die for sure, Ray used voodoo to transfer his soul into one of the dolls, and the store was then struck by lightning and it burned to the ground. The same day, a young boy named Andrew William Barclay made breakfast for his widowed mother Karen and tells her that he wants a good guy doll for his 6th birthday after watching a television commercial for it. Unable to afford the full price, Karen buys a stolen doll, Chucky, from a homeless man, which is the same doll that Charles Lee Ray had transferred his soul into. Chucky tries to use Andy to transfer his soul into, since Andy was the first person whom Chucky revealed his secret to, and thus the only person Chucky could transfer his soul into, in accordance with the voodoo spell. Chucky ended up being burnt to a crisp but somehow survives. It is also thought that Chucky was killed after Karen Barclay shoots off his head, his left leg, right arm and then his heart. But by the end of the film, the doll repeats,
"Hi, I am Chucky, wanna play?"
Child's Play 1990. Andy Barclay, now 8 years old, has been placed with a foster family after the events of the first film, and his mother, Karen, has been undergoing psychiatric testing after maintaining that Chucky was in fact alive. Detective Mike Norris knew that Chucky was in fact alive and possessed by Charles Lee Ray, but was threatened into facing dismissal unless he told the authorities that Karen was unstable. To prove their bad publicity wrong, Play Pals Incorporated, the creator of the Good Guy dolls, decided to reconstruct the body of Chucky. The effort is to prove to the public that nothing was actually wrong with the line of Good Guy dolls and that the Barclays' claims were nothing more than an isolated incident. The company assumes that an employee had tampered with Chucky's voice synthesizer, and during Chucky's reconstruction, which is witnessed by Matson and Mr. Sullivan, the CEO of the Play Pals company, the soul of serial killer Charles Lee Ray is resurrected unintentionally. Much like the first film, one of the technicians is electrocuted, presumably using his life energy to bring Chucky back to life. And now that Chucky has returned, he resumes his search for Andy, and the next morning, Chucky follows Andy to school, where he vandalizes his schoolwork, making his teacher mad, and then Chucky murdered the teacher, and so the blame is put onto Andy. Chucky also murders Andy's foster father Philip, and Andy gets blamed for that too, and is then sent back to the orphanage. Chucky also murders Joanne, Andy's previous foster mother, and then takes Kyle, who is Andy's foster sister, and then Chucky forces Kyle to drive him to the orphanage to go get Andy. And on the way to the orphanage, a policeman pulls Kyle over, for speeding, and he does not give Kyle a ticket and allows her to go on her way. Chucky demands Kyle to drive faster, and she complains that they will just get pulled over again. Kyle fastens her seatbelt and begins to drive much faster, and suddenly she slams on the brakes and Chucky goes flying through the windshield. Chucky jumps onto the hood of the car, and then Kyle steps on the gas and drives into a chain link fence. Not knowing where the doll is, Kyle cautiously steps out of the car, and Chucky jumps onto her back from behind. Chucky brings Andy to the Good Guy factory with Kyle in pursuit. After failing to transfer his soul into Andy's body, Chucky realizes that he is trapped in his doll form. He attempts to kill both Andy and Kyle, but instead is doused in hot molten plastic after his legs and right arm are severed. The enraged and mangled Chucky is killed when Kyle shoves an air hose in his mouth. You see, the soul of Charles Lee Ray had been trying to transfer his soul from the Good Guy doll into Andy, but by the time he got to Andy, it was too late. Child's Play 1991. The film begins with the factory from the conclusion of Child's Play 2, now abandoned and covered in cobwebs. When a claw pulls the melted mass of plastic that was formerly the killer doll Chucky, blood that was trapped inside bleeds out into a vat of new plastic, magically allowing Chucky to reform as a new doll, bringing him back to life with a feral scream of pain. It's revealed to be 8 years since the events of the last film, and the Good Guy Doll Company returns the iconic doll line into production despite protests that it may reignite a controversy that surrounded young Andy Barclay as detailed in the last two films. Given the CEO of Good Guy Doll Company, President Sullivan, as a model of their new line of dolls, Chucky hides in the man's luxurious, toy-decorated apartment and attacks him while he's relaxing. Chucky searches for Andy on one of the dead executive's computers and discovers that the boy never completely recovered from his attacks, and as a last resort, the foster care system sent him to Kent Military School to straighten him out. Chucky then plans his revenge, and upon discovering the location of Andy, Chucky cleverly mails himself to Andy's school, where he is discovered by a young private named Ronald Ron Tyler, Jeremy Solvers. Realizing that Tyler is the first person to whom he revealed his identity in his new body, Chucky must now use Tyler instead of Andy for the soul transfer. Andy was in pursuit to stop Chucky from transferring his soul into Tyler's body, and Tyler out of panic flees to the woods and makes for a carnival that has taken place not far from the academy. Andy with D Silva confronts Chucky, now armed with a security guard's spare handgun, inside a horror themed funhouse where he knocks Tyler unconscious to try and steal his soul. Chucky's death comes by a series of things. His face is partially sliced off by a scythe, swung by a statue of the Grim Reaper, then one arm is blown off by Andy's revolver, which Andy took off of a dead security guard that Chucky killed, then he's shot in the chest, and finally, as Andy and Chucky struggle atop a great pile of foam skulls, Tyler hands Andy his pocket knife that Andy gave him back earlier so that Tyler would have protection from Chucky, and cuts his other hand off. Therefore, Chucky won't have any way of holding onto Andy and gets flipped over into a giant fan, which dices him into numerous pieces and eventually killing him. Afterwards, Andy goes with the police to give his story, while the police take Chucky's decapitated body parts to the police station, where it will be impounded as evidence, as we'll see in Bride of Chucky. Bride of Chucky, 1998. This film opens up with the introduction to Tiffany, played by Jennifer Tilly, and she's a former lover and accomplice of serial killer Charles Lee Ray, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Tiff acquires the remains of Chucky after bribing a police officer, and later murdering him. Tiff crudely stitches Chucky back together and uses an incantation from a book entitled Voodoo for Dummies to reanimate Chucky, after which Tiffany learns that the ring she proudly wore for 10 years was not actually an engagement ring, but was stolen by Chucky from a wealthy old woman named Vivian Van Pelt, as I mentioned in the beginning. An enraged Tiffany confines Chucky to a playpen, which she bought for the baby she wanted to have. After escaping, Chucky electrocutes Tiffany in her own bathtub and transfers her soul into a bridal doll that she bought for Chucky. Tiffany immediately wants to get out of the doll body, but Chucky tells her that the only way to return to human form is with the heart of Damballa, a mystical amulet that Chucky was wearing the night he became a doll. And the amulet was buried in a cemetery in Hackensack, New Jersey, where Chucky's human corpse is buried along with the amulet. Tiffany calls her neighbour Jesse, Nick's stable, offering to pay him to get them there by the next day. Unaware that Tiffany and Chucky are dolls, he takes advantage of the opportunity to take his girlfriend named Jade, Catherine Hicks, from her overprotective uncle named Warren Kincaid. He asks Jade to accompany him and she accepts his offer, and before leaving, Chief Warren attempts to frame Jesse by putting a bag of weed in his van, unaware that Tiffany and Chucky were present in the van, getting a ride to Hackensack. Tiffany and Chucky fatally wound Warren with nails. That's a really hard one to say. They wound Warren with nails, concealing his body in the truck. En route to their destination, Tiffany and Chucky kill anyone getting in their way, framing Jesse and his girlfriend Jade in the process. To make matters worse, Tiffany and Chucky intend to steal Jesse and Jade's bodies using voodoo. Both Jesse and Jade decide that they should get some rest and stop at a motel, where they meet newlyweds Diane and Russell, who are later killed by falling shards of glass when Tiffany throws a bottle of wine to the ceiling mirror. Chucky even proposes to Tiffany, and they end up having sex. Yeah, don't ask any questions about that. The body of the newlyweds end up being discovered by the hotel maid, and Jesse and Jade are wanted by the police. Both Jesse and Jade discover that the dolls they have been transporting to the Hackensack cemetery are alive, and are forced to drive the dolls to the cemetery. On the way, Tiffany and Chucky get into a fight, instigated by Jesse and Jade, and Jesse ends up crashing and blows up the van. But nevertheless, they manage to reach Hackensack cemetery, but right before Tiffany transfers her soul into Jade, she and Chucky get into another fight, and Tiffany is fatally wounded in the scuff. When police show up, Chucky was shot by Jade, and as Tiffany lay dying, she gave birth to a baby doll. Yep, I know, a baby doll. That's Hollywood for you.
Go ahead and shoot! I'll be back. I always come back! Yay. But dying is such a bitch.
Seed of Chucky, 2004. 6 years after the events of Bride of Chucky, the offspring of Chucky and Tiffany, a gender-confused doll by the name of Glenn, or Glenda, has grown up as an orphan in Great Britain, and it turns out that Glenn, or Glenda, ends up seeing his parents in an episode of Access Hollywood for an upcoming movie titled Chucky Goes Psycho. Glenn then escapes his abusive ventriloquist owner and mails himself to Hollywood, and he used Chucky's amulet to transfer both Chucky and Tiffany's soul into new dolls that the studio had picked for the movie. Honestly man, if I could mail myself to Hollywood and just like live there, I probably would, but it's not that easy. Glenn had no genitalia, so Chucky and Tiffany had a hard time naming him, and Chucky wanted Glenn, but Tiffany wanted Glenda. The child of Chucky wanted to know why it was that they murdered, and they didn't really know. Tiffany proposed that they stop murdering people, but Chucky wasn't really for that idea. And although Glenn didn't really like the idea of killing, he briefly emerges as an alternate personality, Glenda, who pleases her parents by gleefully committing murder, after which Glenn re-emerges for the rest of the film. If you're confused with the names, I am too. It's really confusing unless you watch the film, so my apologies. If you thought that was confusing though, it gets worse. Meanwhile, real-life actress Jennifer Tilly, as herself, is adamant to further her acting career. Tiffany ends up knocking out Tiffany, an American rapper Redman, when he arrives at her mansion to discuss a role for his movie. Chucky's sperm is then used to impregnate Tilly in order to give Glenn or Glenda a human body, and Tilly also appears to be 6 months pregnant within a couple of days, which is odd, but again, Hollywood. And Tilly and her limo driver Stan are tied up to the bed. Tilly then goes into labour and gives birth to twin babies, Glenn and Glenda. This just gets more confusing, but don't worry, we haven't even made it to the Curse of Chucky yet. Tiffany leaves Chucky and he tries to kill her, but Tiffany ends up attacking Chucky with a knife before the police arrive. On the following day, Tiffany and Glenn visit Tilly. And just as Tiffany is transferring her soul into Tilly's body, Chucky axes his way through the door and kills Tilly, who is in Tiffany's doll body. Tiffany barely escapes with Tilly's body, but Chucky and Glenn both believe that she is dead. See, this is so damn confusing. I have no clue how many times I've said the name Tiffany or Tilly here, so I'm really sorry. Anyway, this trauma causes a spark in Glenn, and he is now capable of murder without the help of his other personality, Glenda, and he proceeds to attack his father. Glenn uses some sort of martial arts to fight Chucky, which is stupid, I might add. Glenn proceeds to sever off all of Chucky's limbs. Essentially, Tiffany lives in Tilly's body and has some sort of messed up family that I won't even begin to try and explain. Main point being, the end shows the arm of Chucky grab Glenn, proving that in fact Chucky is back. The Curse of Chucky 2013. The Curse of Chucky picks up after the events of the previous film. A package arrives to a family home of a young paraplegic named Nika, we spoke about earlier in the film, played by Fiona Dourif, the daughter of Brad Dourif, aka the voice of Chucky. And unbeknownst to them was the Chucky doll, and later that night, Nika hears her mother scream and finds her dead from a self-inflicted stab wound. Found near the body was the Chucky doll. Funny, as I'm actually recording this, I'm looking at my phone to read off the script and someone commented, "What? Who hates Rob Zombie? Ridiculous." I know, isn't it? Anyhow, sorry about that. Found near the body was the Chucky doll. After her mother's apparent suicide, Nika's sister named Barb, along with her husband named Ian, daughter named Alice, and live-in nanny named Gillian, as well as a priest father Frank. Alice finds Chucky in the bathroom after Nika moved in and immediately befriended him. Alice and Nika prepare 6 bowls of chili for dinner, and once they leave, Chucky pours rat poison into the 6th bowl, and Father Frank receives the poison-laced chili, and as Father Frank was driving home, he gets into a car accident and was found dead with his head wedged between the wreckage. I feel like this movie only really has one thing, worth mentioning, and that's that it introduces a history between Charles Lee Ray and Nika's mother. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, it turns out that Charles knew Nika's mother and murdered her husband, like I mentioned. And I think the direction for this idea was that he loved her in like a really dark way, and so much so he was willing to kill whoever got in his way. Now, this movie had a pretty awesome ending. Nika ended up surviving after everybody else was killed off, and was ultimately blamed for the crimes that Chucky committed. As the Chucky doll was taken by an officer after the court hearing, Jennifer Tilly murdered the officer and took the doll back, ending the movie off with one sentence: "So, who's next?" Well, that really wasn't the ending, but it really should have been. They ended off the movie by overnighting Chucky to Alice in order to take her soul. Cult of Chuck 2017. Well, no, it's Cult of Chucky. What am I saying? Cult of Chuck. The movie begins with Andy having captured the head of Chucky and torturing it, smoking what looks to be a blunt, and then burning him after Chucky tried taunting him. With Nika being blamed for the murders that took place in Curse of Chucky, she was sent away to a psychiatric hospital, having gone through everything from the death of her mother, her sister Barbara. Her mind was confused, and to make matters worse, everybody around her insisted that Chucky was not real, and she was really responsible for the deaths of her family. And that's kind of funny, because this whole Chucky thing was happening since 1988, when Andy Barclay went through all of this, so I'm not sure why people don't understand that Chucky was real. And it got to a point where she started actually believing them. She had it in her mind that she was pathologically jealous of her sister and obsessed with her daughter Alice. Eventually Chucky shows up at the hospital, and once again more people are found dead, but because of everything that has been put into her head, she doesn't know whether or not Chucky is real, or if it's her committing the murders. Chucky is introduced by one of the workers in the psychiatric hospital, and he claims he purchased Chucky from a Hot Topic, and one of the patients named Madeline keeps Chucky and takes care of him as if it was her child, which her child was dead at the time. Nina ends up being visited by a woman named Miss Valentine, formerly known as Jennifer Tilly. And we come to find out that Miss Valentine was the legal guardian of Alice, and she informs Nika that Alice is no longer alive. But Miss Valentine came with a gift, the same Chucky doll that Alice had. Now that the Chucky doll is back and in the psychiatric hospital, things get messy. Chucky runs into one of the patients who has schizophrenia, and she thinks she is seeing things, but really, Chucky is there and alive, and Chucky finds Nika in bed with her wrist slit open by one of the spokes from her wheelchair. Nika ends up waking up alive. Hold on, does that make sense? Nika ended up waking up alive.
Wait up, man, I heard Jamal from 90th Street. He watched that tape last week, and this morning he woke up dead.
How the hell do you wake up dead?
Because you're alive when you go to sleep.
Wait, just tell me you can
So you
help
telling me that you can go to bed dead and wake up alive?
You can't go to bed dead, man. That shit would be redundant.
Just tell me
No, it
who.
wouldn't. Because you can go to bed and not be dead, and you can die but not be in the bed.
But you are in the bed, man. That's how you wake up dead in the first place, fool.
Damn! That's some quantum shit right there, man.
That's weird. Because if you're alive, you wake up, so you don't wake up alive, you just wake up. Anyhow, Nika ends up realizing that in the pool of blood was written "not so fast." Nika then realizes that the schizophrenic woman had been murdered, and the pool of blood had the words "Chucky did it" next to the bed. Andy Barclay tries bringing the head of Chucky to the hospital to prove that Chucky is real and that Nika was not crazy, but they didn't believe him. And for the sake of saving you time, I'm going to skip over most of the deaths as it just takes way too long to cover everything. I will say though, there are some pretty cool kills in the film, so I recommend you watch it. We come to find out that there are multiple Chucky dolls and each doll had a different look. Towards the end of the film, we find that the Chucky learns a spell that allows Charles to transfer his soul into other dolls. So essentially, there was an incantation that allowed Chucky to possess the body of the first person who had told he was alive, which was Andy Barclay. But now with the new spell, it allows Chucky to possess the body of anything that has 2 feet, which he does with the other Chucky dolls that appeared in the psychiatric hospital. But since the spell is more powerful than the last one, Chucky is able to possess the body of a living human being, which he eventually does with Nika. We know that Nika is a paraplegic and can't use her legs, but after being possessed by Chucky, she has full use of her legs. Or shall I say, Chucky has full use of her legs. To blend in and not stick out like a sore thumb, using her body, Chucky kills the head doctor in the psychiatric hospital, and then Andy arrives to the hospital to speak with Nika. But the guard doesn't allow him into the building, so Andy punches the guard and gets committed into the psychiatric hospital. Sometime later down the line, one of the Chucky dolls show up to the room that he was locked in, and a fight begins. Andy ends up killing one of the many dolls that Charles Lee Ray's soul was in, and then another Chucky arrives, but this time it was the one possessing Nika, and she locks Andy in the room he was earlier thrown into. Nika ends up meeting with Tiffany, whose soul is in the body of Jennifer Tilly, the actress who played Tiffany in a few prior movies, and they also have the Tiffany doll using the bride of Chucky, and she also comes alive. Meanwhile, Andy is still locked up in the psychiatric hospital, but he is not alone, as there was one Chucky doll left behind to keep an eye on Andy. The post-credit scene shows a familiar face show of the continued torture in the Chucky head that Andy had kept, and it's revealed to be Kyle from Child's Play 2. So with this next installment, we're supposed to be getting a reboot for the original film, so I don't know what their plans are to continue this story, but I will say if the reboot doesn't do well, they have a, idea of what they could do next, because this movie kind of sets it all up for, I guess, a sequel. Not a sequel, I don't know how many movies there have been, but it sets up for another movie to follow off on this story. This video has been incredibly long to film, like almost over half an hour of like straight just recording my voice, and I'm standing for so long and it hurts. Okay, so I tried my best to explain the Chucky franchise before you're going to watch the movie. I will say, if you want to watch the new Chucky movie, you don't actually have to watch all of these movies. You can literally just watch the first one, or even don't, and that works too because it's a complete reboot to the first film. But if you want to be familiar on the history of the Chucky franchise, I recommend you watch all the Chucky movies before the movie comes out. You have a good bit of time. But yeah, the video came out late. I didn't get the chance to edit it early enough, so that's why I'm here now. But I hope you enjoyed. I want to thank everyone for all the support I've been getting lately. It's been incredible, and I'm going to leave you to it. I hope you have a good week, everybody. Thank you so much, and take care.